Stop asking for money, my daughter sneered at Thanksgiving. It's embarrassing. I lowered my fork, the piece of roasted turkey suddenly heavy. Around the long oak dining table, the silence became thick. My son-in-law David stared at his plate, suddenly fascinated by his mashed potatoes. My older son Ryan, who had driven 4 hours to be here, stiffened in his chair. Jessica just swirled her wine, her chin tilted up, waiting for me to shrink. I didn't. I just smiled, a small, calm curve of my lips. You're right. Then I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it beside my plate. Funny, though, because I've been paying off your $30,000 credit card debt for 3 years. Jessica's smirk faltered. Mom, what are you talking about? Don't be dramatic. I'm not, I replied smoothly. I just think it's time I take your advice. I didn't wait for her to formulate another insult. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up, illuminating my face in the dim dining room light. I opened my banking app. It only took a second for Face ID to let me in. There they were, the 4 recurring transfers I had set up quietly all those months ago. I was 64, a widow of 4 years. When my husband Arthur died, he left me a paid-off house and a comfortable pension. I didn't need much. Jessica, on the other hand, needed everything. The kitchen remodel, the private gymnastics lessons for the kids, the luxury SUV. She never explicitly asked for large lump sums. She just cried about the minimum payments. She wept about the stress. So quietly, without making a fuss, I had logged into my own accounts and set up auto-pays directly to her credit card portals. You're just trying to embarrass me in front of David. Jessica snapped, her voice rising an octave. I'm really not, I murmured. I tapped the first scheduled transfer. Cancel. A small green check mark appeared. Then the second. Cancel. David finally looked up, his brow furrowed. Jessica, what debt is she talking about? She ignored him, glaring at me. Put your phone away, Mom. You're ruining dinner. I tapped the third, then the fourth. Cancel. Cancel. It took exactly 45 seconds. 4 years of quiet, financial bleeding stopped with the pat of my thumb. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and picked up my water glass. Dinner is lovely, Jessica. The turkey is perfectly cooked, but the peace in the room was already gone, replaced by a ticking clock. The tension hung in the air like smoke. Jessica tried to steer the conversation back to her recent trip to Napa Valley, describing the vineyards with a brittle, forced enthusiasm. I simply listened, nodding politely. I didn't feel the need to argue or defend myself. I knew the numbers. It started with a simple grocery bill 3 years ago. Jessica called panicked at the checkout line, claiming her card was declined. I transferred $300 instantly. 2 weeks later, it was a sudden medical bill for the dog. Then she confessed she was drowning in the interest of 2 high-balance credit cards. She hadn't told David. She feared he would leave her if he knew how much she had spent outfitting their home to look like a designer showroom. I hadn't given her a lecture. I hadn't gone to a lawyer to draft a loan agreement. I just asked for the login portals and quietly set up my bank to clear $200 a month to keep her afloat. I thought I was helping her find her footing. Instead, I had simply funded an illusion. Ryan leaned over his shoulder, brushing mine. Did you really just cut her off? He whispered, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and respect. I just followed her instructions, I whispered back, taking a sip of my water. I looked at Jessica. She was laughing too loudly at a joke David hadn't even finished making. She wore a silk blouse that I knew cost more than my first car. She had mistaken my silence for weakness, my financial support for an obligation. Because I lived in a modest ranch house and drove a 6-year-old sedan, she assumed I was out of touch, perhaps even a bit pathetic. She assumed my quiet life meant I had nothing better to do than write invisible checks to maintain her lifestyle. Dessert was served, a beautiful store-bought tart that Jessica presented as if she had baked it herself. I accepted a slice. I felt lighter than I had in years. The heavy, persistent weight of managing someone else's irresponsibility was gone. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vengeful. I just felt incredibly, wonderfully detached. David cleared his throat, looking between Jessica and me. "So, Laurel?" He started, his tone cautious. "Are you doing okay, financially, I mean? Jessica mentioned you asked her to cover the holiday groceries." Ah, so that was the story. I had asked Jessica to pick up 2 bottles of sparkling cider on her way over. She had twisted that into me begging for handouts. I smiled at David. "I am doing perfectly fine, David. Better than ever, actually." I took a bite of the tart, waiting for the digital fallout to begin. It began exactly 10 minutes after I finished my dessert. Jessica's phone, when resting face up next to her wine glass, vibrated violently against the wood. The screen flashed, "Chase alert, payment declined." She glanced at it, her expression tightening, and quickly flipped the phone face down. "Just a spam email," she announced to the table, though nobody had asked. A minute later it buzzed again, a long, sustained vibration, then a short one, then 2 more in rapid succession. I knew exactly what was happening. It was the end of the month. My auto-pays were scheduled to clear her accounts on the 28th. Without my funds, her own bank was attempting to pull the balances, hitting insufficient funds and triggering alerts across all her connected accounts. David frowned, putting his fork down. "Jess, your phone is going crazy. Is there an emergency?" "No," she snapped a little too sharply. She grabbed the device and shoved it into her pocket, but the muffled buzzing continued. It sounded like an angry hornet trapped in silk. Ryan caught my eye across the table. He didn't smile, but I saw the quiet realization dawning on him. He had always been the responsible one, the son who lived within his means and never asked for a dime. He knew his sister's habits, but he hadn't known the extent of my involvement. "You sure?" David pressed, clearly unsettled by her reaction. "It might be the babysitter." "The kids are upstairs watching a movie, David." "It's fine," she hissed, but her cheeks were flushed a deep, uncomfortable red. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. She finally understood that I hadn't been making an empty threat. The financial cord was completely severed. I placed my napkin on the table and pushed my chair back. The wood scraped loudly against the floorboards. "Well, it has been a wonderful evening. Thank you for hosting, Jessica." "You're leaving already?" David asked, surprised. "We haven't even had coffee." "I have an early morning tomorrow," I replied smoothly. "And I think Jessica has some administrative things to take care of." Jessica stood up, her fists clenched at her sides. "You can't just walk out, Mom. We need to talk." "We have nothing to talk about," I countered gently. "You asked me to stop embarrassing you by asking for money." I agreed. "The rest is your responsibility." I walked to the hallway, retrieved my wool coat, and stepped out into the crisp November air, leaving the sound of her buzzing phone behind me. The next morning, I woke up at 6, just as I always did. My house was completely silent. No buzzing phones, no frantic text messages demanding emergency transfers. I made my coffee, black, no sugar, and sat by the large bay window in my living room, watching the frost melt off the neighbor's lawn. I expected to feel a pang of guilt. Mothers are conditioned to feel guilty for everything, especially when their children struggle. But as I held the warm mug between my hands, I searched my heart and found nothing but an expansive, quiet peace. For 3 years, I had compromised my own retirement security, lying awake at night calculating interest rates for a grown woman who treated me like a broken ATM. That was over. At 8:30, my phone rang. It wasn't Jessica. It was Ryan. "Morning, Mom." His deep voice echoed through the speaker. You okay? I'm perfectly fine, sweetheart. Just enjoying my coffee. Ryan exhaled loudly. Well, Jessica isn't. She called me at midnight crying hysterically. She said you ruined her life over a petty argument. I took a slow sip. What did you tell her I told her that $30,000 isn't a petty argument? I had no idea you were carrying that for her mom. Why didn't you tell me? Because it was between her and me, until she made it public at the dinner table. I didn't defend my choices. I didn't need to. Ryan was a practical man. He understood the math. David is losing his mind. Ryan continued. He found out about the secret accounts this morning. Apparently one of the cards is maxed out at 15 grand just from furniture and vacations. He thought she was paying it off with her bonus from work. That is unfortunate for David, I noted calmly. But it is their marriage, not mine. Are you prepared for the hurricane? Ryan asked gently. You know she won't just let this go. She's going to come to your house. I'm aware, I replied. Let her come. My doors are locked and my mind is made up. We hung up a few minutes later. I didn't pace. I didn't rehearse arguments. I simply walked into this kitchen, loaded the dishwasher, and began preparing a batch of oatmeal cookies. I was in the middle of measuring flour when I heard the aggressive crunch of tires pulling into my gravel driveway. I didn't rush to the door. I finished leveling my cup of flour, poured it into the mixing bowl, and washed my hands. By the time I wiped them on a towel, the doorbell was ringing incessantly, accompanied by the heavy thud of knuckles against the wood. I walked to the front hallway and opened the door. Jessica stood on the porch, wrapped in a heavy designer trench coat, her hair messy and her eyes red-rimmed. She looked furious, terrified, and small all at once. Fix it, she demanded, pushing past me into the foyer without an invitation. I stood my ground, leaving the front door wide open. Good morning, Jessica. Fix what you know exactly, what she shouted, her voice echoing in my quiet house. My accounts are frozen. David saw the alert emails. He's demanding to see the full statements. You have to log back in and pay the minimums right now before the late fees hit. No, I said simply. It was a complete sentence. I didn't elaborate. She blinked, seemingly unable to comprehend the word. What do you mean? No, Mom. I am your daughter. You can't just pull the rug out from under me without warning. I didn't pull a rug. I stopped holding up the ceiling. I crossed my arms. My posture relaxed, but immovable. You stood in your dining room and told your husband and brother that I was a burden who begged for money. You wanted to play the successful, independent woman. I am simply allowing you to be one. I was angry. I was just talking. She threw her hands in the air. I didn't think you'd actually do it. Please, Mom. David is talking about separating our bank accounts. He's furious. I imagine he is. I agreed, softly. Financial infidelity usually has that effect on a marriage. She flinched as if I had slapped her. You are incredibly cruel. No, Jessica. I am incredibly tired. I have funded your lifestyle for 3 years. I have compromised my own peace of mind so you could look good on social media. That ends today. I stepped back toward the open door, gesturing outside. You need to go home and talk to your husband. I cannot save you from your own choices anymore. She stared at me, searching for the mother who used to fold under her tears. She didn't find her. Without another word, she turned and marched out, her expensive heels clicking angrily against the pavement. I closed the door, locked it, and went back to my baking. 2 days passed without a word from Jessica. I spent the time organizing my garden shed and reading books I had neglected for months. The quiet was intoxicating. I was no longer checking my phone every hour, waiting for a crisis text. On Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. The The caller ID displayed David's name. I wiped the soil from my hands and answered. "Hello, David." "Laurel?" He sighed. His voice sounded hollow, completely stripped of the confident, booming energy he usually carried. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course." "Is everything all right?" "No," he admitted bluntly. "Not really." Jessica finally showed me the full financial statements. All of them. The hidden cards, the personal loans. He paused, and I could hear the sound of him rubbing his face. I saw the transfer history, Laurel. 3 years of you depositing money every single month. I stayed silent, letting him lead the conversation. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, the hurt bleeding through his tone. "Why did you let me sit there at Thanksgiving while she made those comments about you, David? You are her husband. It was never my place to bypass her and expose her secrets to you. I helped her because she is my daughter, and she told me she was desperate. But when she chose to humiliate me to protect her own ego, the arrangement ended. She told me you insisted on paying for things he countered weekly. She said you wanted to feel involved in the kids' lives." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "I see. Well, the truth is, written in the bank statements, David. You can draw your own conclusions." "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I genuinely didn't know. We have to sell her car. We might have to pause her gymnastics classes. The debt is astronomical." "I'm sorry to hear that, David. Truly. But it is a mess the two of you must clean up together. She's angry with you," he warned. "She's talking about not bringing the kids over for Christmas unless you apologize." Ah, the ultimate weapon. The grandchildren. In the past, the mere threat of losing access to them would have sent me scrambling for my checkbook. But I had spent the last 3 days rebuilding my boundaries brick by brick. "Thank you for telling me," I replied evenly. "I wish you both the best in sorting this out." I hung up the phone feeling a profound sense of closure. The truth was out. The manipulation had lost its power. December arrived with a heavy snowfall and a bitter chill. The holidays were approaching, usually a time of frantic preparation, expensive gift buying, and exhausting family logistics. This year, my calendar was blissfully blank. A week before Christmas, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a single stiff card from Jessica. It wasn't a holiday greeting. It was a list of demands masquerading as a compromise. She wrote that if I wanted to see my grandchildren on Christmas Eve, I needed to apologize for embarrassing her and provide a holiday loan of $5,000 to help cover their winter property taxes. I read the card twice, standing by the kitchen counter. She was trying to weaponize the children, holding my love for them hostage against my wallet. It was a classic tactic, one she had used successfully when they were toddlers. But the kids were 10 and 12 now. They had their own phones. They called me on Sundays. I wasn't going to disappear from their lives just because I stopped funding their mother's delusions. I didn't reply to the letter. I didn't call her to negotiate. Instead, I opened my laptop and booked a 3-day stay at a quiet, snowy cabin 2 hours north. I packed my warmest sweaters, a stack of crossword puzzles, and 3 new novels. 2 days before Christmas, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Are you coming over on the 24th or not? The kids are asking." I typed back immediately. "I am taking a trip out of town for the holidays. I have already mailed the kids their presents directly. Merry Christmas." The response was instantaneous. My phone rang. I declined the call. It rang again. I silenced the device and placed it in my suitcase. She was panicking. The realization that I was entirely unbothered by her absence was finally setting in. Without my desperate need for her approval, she had no leverage. She couldn't control me through guilt, and she certainly couldn't control me through my grandchildren. I spent Christmas Eve sitting by a wood-burning stove in the cabin, drinking hot cocoa and reading. There were no arguments over burnt rolls. There were no snide comments about my clothes. There were no secret requests for money in the hallway. There was only the crackle of the fire and the deep, abiding comfort of my own company. By late January, the facade Jessica had spent years building completely crumbled. I didn't have to seek out the information. Ryan came over one Sunday afternoon and filled me in. She sold the luxury SUV, Ryan announced, dropping his coat onto my armchair. David made her trade it in for a used sedan. He canceled her credit cards completely. She's on a cash allowance now. I poured him a cup of coffee and set a plate of biscuits on the table. How is she handling it? Terribly. Ryan laughed, though there was no real joy in it. She had to get a part-time job at a boutique downtown to help cover the minimum payments. She's actually working, Mom. On her feet. 40 hours a week. I sat down across from him. I didn't feel a sense of triumph. I didn't want my daughter to suffer, but I understood that this was the only way she would ever learn. I had shielded her from the consequences of her actions for so long that she had forgotten how the real world operated. David is managing every penny, Ryan continued. He found out she was lying to her friends, telling them you were the one who went broke, and that's why you couldn't help them anymore. I nodded slowly, taking a sip of coffee. People will believe whatever narrative makes them the victim. It doesn't bother me, Ryan. The truth always reveals itself in the end. Ryan leaned forward, his expression turning serious. She's struggling, Mom. The reality check is hitting her hard. I think she's going to come to you again. Not to demand, but to beg. My answer remains the same, I assured him. And Ryan was right. 3 weeks later, my doorbell rang on a rainy Tuesday evening. I opened it to find Jessica. She wasn't wearing a designer coat. She wore a simple raincoat, her hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. She looked exhausted. The arrogant spark that usually danced in her eyes had been completely extinguished. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. Her voice lacked its usual demanding edge. I stepped aside, leaving the door open just enough for her to pass. "You can come in, but my checkbook stays closed." Jessica sat on the edge of my sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The silence in the room stretched heavy and uncomfortable. I sat across from her in my armchair, waiting. "David is threatening divorce," she whispered, staring at her knuckles. "If we miss the mortgage payment this month, the bank will start the foreclosure process. The boutique doesn't pay enough. I've sold my jewelry. I've sold my bags. It's not enough." She finally looked up at me, her eyes brimming with genuine tears. "I know what I did was wrong. I know I used you. But if we lose the house, the kids lose their home. Please, Mom. Just a loan. A strict loan. I'll sign whatever you want." I looked at my daughter. I saw the desperation, the fear. 4 years ago, I would have crumbled instantly. I would have drained my savings to protect her from the pain of failure. But I knew better now. Saving her from the fire meant she would never learn to stop playing with matches. "No, Jessica." The words hung in the air. She gasped quietly, a sharp intake of breath. "Mom, please, I cannot be your safety net anymore." I explained, my voice steady and devoid of anger. "If I bail you out, now David will never trust that you've learned your lesson, and you will never actually feel the weight of your mistakes. You need to hit the bottom so you can figure out how to climb back up. We'll lose everything," she cried, the tears spilling over. "Then you will downsize. You will rent an apartment. You will survive, Jessica. People do it every day." I stood up, walked over to the bookshelf, and pulled out a thick, worn book on personal finance and debt management. I walked back and placed it gently on the coffee table in front of her. "This is what I can offer you," I said. "Knowledge, support when you need someone to talk to. But my finances are my own. You are an adult. It is time you act like one." She stared at the book for a long time. She didn't scream. She didn't throw it at me. The fight had completely left her. She slowly stood up, wiped her eyes, and walked to the door. She paused on the threshold, looking back at me. I really am sorry, Mom. I know you are, I replied softly. And I forgive you. But the answer is still no. A year later, Thanksgiving looked very different. It wasn't held at Jessica's sprawling house with expensive caterers and forced smiles. It was held at Ryan's modest suburban home. I arrived exactly on time, carrying a homemade pecan pie and a bottle of simple, decent wine. When I walked into the kitchen, Jessica was at the sink washing potatoes. She wore jeans and a plain sweater. Her hair was shorter, her face tired, but remarkably clear. "Hi, Mom," she said, turning off the tap and wiping her hands on a towel. "Hello, Jessica." I placed the pie on the counter. "The turkey smells wonderful." She smiled, a small, genuine expression. "Ryan did the turkey. I just brought the sides. We couldn't afford much this year." There was no bitterness in her voice, only acceptance. She and David hadn't lost the house, but they had come perilously close. They had refinanced, severely cut their expenses, and Jessica was now working full-time. The road to financial recovery was long, but they were walking it together without my invisible checkbook paving the way. Dinner was loud, chaotic, and wonderfully normal. The grandchildren ran around the table, Ryan told terrible jokes, and David looked relaxed for the first time in years. Jessica didn't try to dominate the conversation. She didn't insult anyone to elevate herself. She simply existed, a flawed but recovering human being. When the evening ended, I hugged my grandchildren, said goodbye to Ryan, and walked out to my car. Jessica followed me out to the driveway. "Thank you for coming, Mom," she murmured, shivering slightly in the cold air. "It was a lovely evening," I replied, unlocking my car doors. She hesitated, her hand resting on the roof of my car. "You know, I hated you for a long time after you stopped the payments. I thought you were the most selfish person in the world." I looked at her, my expression calm. "I know. But you saved me," she whispered, her eyes meeting mine. "You stopped me before I destroyed everything completely. So, thank you." I didn't offer a dramatic speech. I didn't pull her into a tearful embrace. I just nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of the boundary we had finally built. "Drive safely, Jessica." I got into my car, started the engine, and drove home. My house was dark and quiet when I arrived. I walked inside, locked the door, and turned on the hall light. My bank accounts were secure. My retirement was safe. My dignity was intact. I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely, wonderfully free.